And in fixation error, what happens is jump to a conclusion or we arrive at a conclusion and then we stick to it despite mounting cues that we're on the wrong track. It's a very natural thing for us to do. Here's the big idea: most people's actions, even confusing, frustrating, or sometimes downright dangerous ones, make sense once you know how they were framing the situation. Welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph. One of the things we do here is help people get learning at the absolute point that they need it most. And in this podcast, we do that every week with something we call the readiness goal for this episode. And the readiness goal for this episode is you're going to be ready to stop asking, what were they thinking? With confusion, judgment, and righteous indignation. Instead, you're going to be able to ask it with curiosity, driving toward better insight about what's going on with the other person. You'll have a practical way to reverse engineer behavior, especially baffling behavior or wrong-headed behavior, but even awesome behavior that you see in other people by uncovering the hidden mental frames that are driving what you see them doing. I'd like to start out by telling a bit of a story that happened when I was a doctoral student studying fixation error using simulation. So, fixation error is a process by which we see what's going on in the world and we decide on what is happening. So, a diagnosis is an example of deciding what's happening, drawing a conclusion that somebody is an awesome person or drawing a conclusion that somebody is a jerk is deciding what's happening. And in fixation error, what happens is jump to a conclusion or we arrive at a conclusion and then we stick to it despite mounting cues that we're on the wrong track. It's a very natural thing for us to do. So one day I was watching simulations as part of my doctoral research, and I observed a resident anesthesiologist, that's a anesthesiologist in training, taking care of a patient during a simulation. And the patient's blood oxygen level was just going down, down, down. And I had worked really hard to learn as much as I could about how do you care for patients in the different emergency contexts I was studying. And in this case, I had learned that as the oxygen saturation drops, that's how much oxygen is there in your blood, it's not a good thing. So in this scenario, I watched the resident search heroically for something called a bag valve mask while the oxygen saturation dropped 92, 85, 77. And by the way, you want it to be up close to 100. Meanwhile, options that he had, like putting in another breathing device, like a laryngeal mask apparatus, anything that would get oxygen into this patient's lungs, appeared to be nowhere on his menu. And at first, to me, it seemed like a mind boggling mistake. Like, this patient needs oxygen, dude. But when I asked him about it during the debrief, he looked at me square in the eye and said, I didn't know there were other ways to oxygenate. I thought if I didn't have a bag mask, I couldn't ventilate this patient. And boom, suddenly it wasn't a mistake. It was a perfectly rational action based on a very specific frame. I really had to rock back on my heels and notice how judgmental I had become and how, when I asked him what he was really thinking, there was a totally excellent reason for it. I also had to remind myself that he was probably nervous. And when you're nervous, your autonomic nervous system kicks in and your own heart rate might go up and your palms might get sweaty and your brain's ability to think gets constricted. So you often regress to well learned responses. And when you regress to well learned responses, that means he was probably taught if there's an emergency of this sort, you need a bag valve mask. And so that's what he was searching for, a sort of fixation error. So, what's going on here? What's going on in situations where somebody appears to be doing something that to your eye makes zero sense? Or what's going on here when somebody does something that is extremely skillful and you have no idea how they did it? Well, here's the big idea: most people's actions, even confusing, frustrating, or sometimes downright dangerous ones, make sense once you know how they were framing the situation. So here's the model. It's super practical and simple. We have certain ways of thinking about things, frames, and a frame is an invisible mental model. Our assumptions, it's our beliefs, it's also made up of our emotions, our reactions. Frames are not static, they change over time, and they are dynamically evolving as we interact with the world. So sometimes we use the word sense making to talk about the active creation of how we filter reality. And so that's what a frame is in this model. All that filtering, all that thinking, think of it as metaphorical software that is driving what we say and what we do, our actions. So the visible behaviors we see people do are shaped by these invisible frames. And then lastly, the actions lead to results in the real world, whether it might be a patient outcome, as in the patient is desaturating, has less and less oxygen, and is having some bad outcomes as a result of that, whether it's somebody feeling insulted or shut down in a meeting, whether it's an amazing result, two people come together better than they might have because of a beautiful action of mediation by a colleague in a meeting. So, frames are what we're thinking and feeling that drive our actions that in turn drive results. So, when somebody does something that leaves you scratching your head or wanting to scream, this model invites you to hit pause and ask, what would someone have to believe or assume for that action to make perfect sense? My colleague Steve Taylor at Worcester Polytechnic Institute sometimes talks about even a little off kilter actions being a quote unquote active genius. Because once you understand the frame that someone's coming from, the thing they're saying or the thing they're doing is often a genius solution to how they are framing the situation. So the goal here is not to excuse mistakes. The goal here is not to write off amazing performance as unreplicable by anybody else, but to understand those mistakes or understand that amazing performance so that we can either help people change so they can be more effective in the future, or understand their frame so we and they can sustain that amazing performance. So when we're triggered or when somebody's done something that annoys us, instead of blaming the person, what the heck is wrong with them? We can shift to wondering, what were they assuming that made them do that? Or what problem were they trying to solve? Or what were they missing or over focusing on? And when we uncover that frame, we can get curious. We can maybe offer a new one, such as in the debriefing from the story I told you. My colleague, the anesthesiologist who was debriefing with me, said, hey, listen, when you can't find a bag valve mask quickly, maybe there's other things you can ventilate with. What are the other things you can ventilate with? So helping people go from that fixated frame of I can only use object A to solve this problem to maybe I can use object B, C, or D to also solve this problem. Importantly, I'd like to wrap up with this. We are not just pointing out a mistake. We are not just pointing out an awesome performance and leaving it that. What we're doing when we attempt to find out what people are thinking is we're opening up a new set of mental models, a new possible set of actions, and either better results if it was a mistake or sustaining amazing results. And so by clarifying what is that frames, actions, results chain, it's sort of like upgrading your brain's operating system. Same hardware, but better logic. So you may recognize the connection between this internal move of getting curious about what are people's frames and using this framework as a kind of overlay when you see people doing things, wondering, that's the action. I wonder what was their frame. And our previous episode of when you think, what the is that person doing, flipping it to what's their frame. All right, let's talk about the workout of the week. This week's leadership rep is all about decoding the mystery of what's going on with other people. So you could think about your mental gym circuit for the week is this. One, think of something someone did recently that really caught your attention. It could have been excellent performance. It could have amazed you in some way. Maybe it was puzzling, or maybe you were thinking, why on earth would they do that? Then name the action you saw them do, something they said, something they didn't do. Then name the result. What was the consequence in your view of that action or consequences that were significant? What was their behavior and what happened next? And then the final step, three, is now generate, you're just going to invent them, 2 to 3 possible frames they might hold that would have made their action make perfect sense. So here's an example that I did. I noticed a colleague interrupts a coworker mid sentence during a meeting, and I'm thinking, WTF, so rude. The result that I observed was that the coworker shuts down and doesn't say much for the rest of the meeting. They basically have withdrawn. So, what I might ask myself, putting aside my sort of judgmental reaction initially, is what are the frames of this interrupter? Okay, maybe she was thinking something like, I need to correct misinformation immediately before it spreads. And that's why she jumped in and interrupted this person. Or maybe she's thinking, I'm supposed to model being in control. Or maybe her frame is, this meeting is my only chance to get our team on the right track. Time is short. So, workout of the week. Think of something you saw that caught your attention. Name that thing, speaking, doing, acts of omission as well as commission. Name the result. And then, as an exercise, try to invent 2 or 3 frames that might make that action make perfect sense. Perhaps you might prefer a slight twist on this assignment, which is reflect on a moment when an action you took didn't land well or went really well and understand your own frames. That's another twist on this assignment. So, note an action you did, note the result, and then ask yourself, what were my actual frames? Love to hear what you learn about speculating about other people's frames or what you learn about your own frames. Very curious now to hear from you on that.
What if building leadership and connection skills in real life was less about grand epiphanies and more about small, consistent reps? The way athletes train, the way musicians practice, the way simulation refines teaming and clinical performance. Push ups, sit ups, building up your cardio. We put challenges and weights in front of ourselves to get fit. We embrace no pain, no gain. Yet when we find something difficult in real life, especially an interpersonal something, we often skitter away. We put down the weight and walk away from the workout. Curious Now helps us lean into those everyday interactions, the awkward silences, simmering tensions, and high stakes conversations. and treat them like reps in a leadership gym. Curious now, stronger later.